Halo's universe is the epitome of an iceberg. On the surface, it just seems like a badass black and white tale of super soldiers and heroes defeating everything in their path to ensure humanity's survival, whatever the cost. But take one peek beneath the surface and you start to realise that binary view is a lot murkier than you first thought. In fact, Halo's a series where really nobody is the good guy, us very much included. Our supposedly heroic future selves are propped up on a history of war crimes, propaganda, heinous atrocities, crimes against humanity, against nature, extreme disinformation campaigns, and so much more. Much like in the real world, the various governments and their sub-agencies in Halo only reveal 1% of what they truly know to the world. The other 99% is either so morally and ethically bankrupt or so likely to cause mass hysteria that it's covered in black ink. But nothing is more redacted than the events of November 17th, 2552, a day that those few who survived will never forget. The Flood invasion of Earth. Today, we're going to dive into the most classified documents in the history of ONI to understand how they managed to cover up not just the Flood's existence, but also their outbreak on Earth. We're also going to cover the potential conspiracies that circulate throughout the general population about these zombies that the government are hiding. And I think by the end, we might all be in agreement that this act by the office stands as a monument to all their sins. So let's begin with the most egregious outbreak that ONI covered up. The outbreak in Voi on November 17th, 2552. This outbreak was, and still is, arguably the most significant event in Earth's history. The Flood, the hateful, corrupted, zombie parasite descendants of the gods, made landfall on the homeworld of humanity, the very species that the Foreigners sacrificed everything to save from them. The historical significance of this event is staggering, to say the least, but even to boil it down to more simple terms, the mere fact that there was a literal zombie outbreak in Eastern Africa was a huge deal, one that should, by all accounts, have caused mass civil unrest across the entire planet, hell, across all the remaining colonies. But it didn't, and that was only in part thanks to ONI. Elite shipmaster Artas Vadum had the foresight to know how fast the Flood would spread if scorched earth measures weren't immediately taken to halt them.
One single flood spore can destroy a species. Were it not for the Arbiter's Council, I would have glassed your entire planet.
And so, within less than an hour of the outbreak beginning, he ordered his fleet to glass half the African continent, destroying all the Flood that made it to Earth and neutralizing the outbreak, at the cost of half a continent and many innocent lives. And what's morbidly funny about this is that, as far as we're currently aware, the top brass within the UNSC was staunchly opposed to this action. I mean, Lord Hood voiced his clear disapproval of Artas's hasty containment procedures during the debrief, even going as far as starting to distrust the shipmaster for his actions. But we ultimately know that, as painful as it was absolutely the right decision. Following the war, Edward Buck and his ODST squad Alpha 9 were sent into what became known as the Voi Exclusion Zone to confirm that the parasite had indeed been destroyed by Artas, and they of course found no traces of Flood. The glassing was successful. So, ONI and the UNSC may have played no part whatsoever in containing the Flood outbreak in their proverbial living room, one, mind you, that their own models later predicted would have infected the entirety of Earth in mere hours, but they sure as hell made quick work in covering it up. Now, we're going to discuss the conspiracies about these events later on in the video, but the official story that ONI gave to the world was that Voi suffered a surprise attack by Truth's fleet, rendering the city and the vast region surrounding it glassed. No ancient parasite nor zombie outbreak was ever publicly mentioned, and to the best of their knowledge, no outside civilians found out about the Flood either. It was a total mission success. Case closed. But this wasn't the first time they'd had to cover the Flood up. Following the Alpha Halo outbreak, we never experienced any chatter or even offhand mentions of the Flood outside of those few who survived it, and also Dr. Horsey, who had to conduct tests on Jonathan just to make sure he wasn't infected. Hell, Hell, even the Marines on Delta Halo had no idea what the Flood were when they first fought them in the Sentinel Wall.
Negative, ma'am. They are not Covenant. Cover that doorway!
So clearly, the Flood's existence didn't even spread throughout the Marine Corps, and if the Marines didn't know about it, then the general public sure as hell didn't either. Now granted, there were very, very few survivors of the Alpha Halo outbreak to actually spread knowledge of the Flood in the first place, but it's clear that neither those few who survived nor any of the top brass who knew about it leaked anything about the parasite to the public. Oni managed to prevent any and all information about its existence from leaking to the press or to civilians, besides one strange exception. So the only individual outside of the survivors and top brass who did somehow know about the Flood was Sergeant Lopez, who somehow knew about Chief fighting them on the ring. And this strange oddity leads us very nicely into the next cover-up, because don't worry, they don't stop there. Oni's attempts to turn the Flood into their very own bioweapon through the means of human experimentation aboard the Mona Lisa were also kept under a heavy coating of black ink, as I'm sure you can imagine. The sole Oni agent in charge of the operations on board the Mona Lisa, Major John Smith, was very clearly an individual hidden behind several layers of false identity. The name John Smith is the textbook age-old false identity name. It's the male equivalent of Jane Doe. His real name is likely very heavily redacted. But further to this, John Smith completely vanished following his escape from the Mona Lisa. When he was taken aboard the Prowler, the Red Horse, its commander, Fucow, detained him, but he remarked that if he was indeed part of Oni Section 3, then they'd likely just use him as a scapegoat if the need arose and just wash their hands of his work. But here's the interesting thing. Nothing in the existing law has ever suggested that such a need ever arose, and John Smith was never heard from again. So, did Oni dispense of John Smith and we just never heard about it, or did they give him another new identity and let him continue his inhumane, evil experiments elsewhere? My money is definitely on the latter. Either way, given that the mere existence of the Mona Lisa, let alone what went down on the ship, has never been mentioned or even referenced once in the 8+ years since it happened, it's very obvious that Oni managed to successfully cover up everything that they were doing on the ship and also how it all went south. Now, there is one extra detail surrounding the Mona Lisa events that really drives home Oni's efforts to keep the Flood concealed, and that is the fact that not one member of the crew who was sent to investigate why the Mona Lisa had gone dark were informed of the Flood. Even their Prowler commander, Fucow, not even he was, and it's heavily implied that, besides Lopez of course, none of them even knew that the Flood existed prior to engaging them on the ship. If even those who are sent to contain their outbreaks aren't informed of their existence, then I think that really goes to show how active the Office are in ensuring that the Flood remain the most tightly kept secret in all of human history. After all, humanity as a species have practically grown up with zombie stories. Movies, TV shows, video games, books, comics, myths and legends. The fictional concept of the dead rising up to feast on the living has existed for thousands upon thousands of years. Hell, it's even present in the Bible. And if the general populace were to learn about the existence of a species that legitimized every single one of those fictional horror stories and metaphorical religious tales, well, they descend into total anarchy. So, if all this Flood talk is giving you a hankering for some Flood slaying, my Flood-themed PCs that are made in partnership with Apex Gaming PCs are the way to go. From the Pure Form to the Gravemind and the Primordial build, there's a PC build here for every level of PC gamer, fit perfectly for all of your Flood slaying needs. Just hit the link in the description and pick one of these bad boys up today. Okay, let's move on now to talk a little bit about the both confirmed and also hypothetical Flood-related information leaks and also official releases that have occurred so far. In the years following the end of the war and also Master Chief's disappearance, a short service was held to commemorate the dead, in which a speech was given by an unknown UNSC commander. He mentions various individuals by name who lost their lives to the Covenant, but towards the end, he says the following.
Brave soldiers who sacrificed everything to eliminate the Flood.
As far as we're aware, this is the most public acknowledgement of the Flood for quite some time following our first encounter with them, but how public it was exactly is up in the air. There was only a small crowd of servicemen in the hall, and whether the speech was broadcast galaxy-wide or kept small and discreet is unknown. My money is definitely on the latter, and if that is the case, then it's fair to assume that all the service people in the room either already knew about the Flood, or were extremely high ranked and, for lack of better phrasing, knew classified information when they heard it. There is always the chance that this was transmitted galaxy-wide, but I strongly doubt ONI would have given the go-ahead for them to just name-drop the Flood in a speech that was ultimately going to be heard by trillions of people. Okay, actually, real quick, I've got a very short crackpot theory to talk about regarding this. So, if this was actually broadcast galaxy-wide, I can imagine ONI pulling some kind of Hunt the Truth meets Metal Gear Solid style censorship with the actual term, the Flood, to ensure that the public heard something different. Kinda like how in Metal Gear Solid, the term the Patriots is translated into Lale Lule Lo by anybody with nanomachines to conceal their existence.
Just a messenger from the Lale Lule Lo.
Yes, this is a massive stretch based on almost no existing law, but come on, it's ONI, you never know. Either way though, I think it's more likely that they just didn't broadcast this beyond a very small group of people who were already in the know. With all that said though, something that we haven't accounted for yet regarding Flood-related leaks is just the simple chatter among Marines who survived them. Now, granted, not many did survive the Flood, but there are absolutely going to be just some regular basic Marine survivors of the Delta Halo outbreak, or the Voi Outbreak, or the Ark Outbreak out there, and there's no way in hell not a single one of them has ever gone to a bar, gotten absolutely wasted, and mentioned the Flood. Don't get me wrong, ONI definitely placed the strongest of gag orders about the Flood on any survivors at the end of the war, but come on, gag orders don't really mean much when you're halfway down a bottle of whiskey, or when a journalist comes to you and offers you your entire net worth 10 times over to anonymously leak classified government war secrets. I refuse to believe that not one single survivor of the war has ever even breathed a word about the Flood, even if they were absolutely hammered on some backwater colony somewhere in some dive bar. I just think there's a negative percentage chance that they've not let their existence slip at least once. However, thanks to Kilo 5, we know, at least indirectly, that this has happened in some capacity. Somehow, somewhere, somebody leaked what happened in Voi. Turns out ONI's OPSEC wasn't as tight as they thought it was. Outer Colony arms dealer Staffan Senske knew the truth about Voi. He knew that the surprise Covenant glassing was a cover-up, and that the reality was something much, much more horrifying. The Flood. But then again, he was also adamant that his daughter had been kidnapped by the government at age 6 and replaced with a clone, so what did he know? Now, I'll be honest, it's been a very long time since I last read Kilo 5, but from what I remember, this wasn't like a commonly known fact on Amnesia. It wasn't like Senske had dedicated his entire life to spreading the truth about the Voi Outbreak, because, well, as we know, he was far too dedicated and obsessed with that absolutely crazy, insane, wild conspiracy theory about the government kidnapping his daughter and replacing her with a clone. Crazy theory, right? He was also an insurrectionist living on the insurrection stronghold colony of Venetia, so even if he had spread the information, it would have been so easy for ONI to just peddle some propaganda throughout the inner colonies that just writes it off as some insane outer colony conspiracy theory, because, I mean, come on paper, it sure as hell does sound like a crazy conspiracy theory. It does make you wonder how he learned the truth about Voi, though. I mean, the two most likely sources are either a direct leak from someone that he knew in the military, or a journalist of some kind who managed to upload video evidence of what actually went down in Voi to Waypoint that Senske managed to download before ONI inevitably wiped it. And you know what? That's another thing that I want to briefly touch on. Given the scale of the Voi outbreak, I absolutely staunchly refuse to believe that not one single person whipped out their phone, or whatever the 2552 equivalent of a phone is, and started filming the Flood. Nowadays, if that kind of thing happened, literally the first thing that 99% of people would do is pull out a phone and start recording, right? Literally the first thing. I guarantee, If a flood outbreak happened on Earth today, you would see a billion tweets or TikToks or YouTube shorts or Instagram reels, or hell, you'd even see like IRL streamers flocking to the outbreak to stream it and record it for content, I guarantee. And you cannot convince me that that wouldn't be the case in the future as well. Hell, maybe it did happen, but just like in Hunt the Truth, when Ben Giro leaked the truth about the Spartans, Oni just ran a perfectly concocted smear campaign that discredited the entire thing, and then locked the journalist up in Midnight Facility until their bitter end. 343, story idea. Either way, they've done it before to contain leaks, and I have no reason to doubt that they'd do it again. Another highly overlooked potential source of a leak is the elites. Now, we're very much allied with the elites, and in some cases, are even actively mixing with them in social settings in the post-war era, and you gotta wonder how compliant the elites would be with Oni gag orders. Yeah, we might be close to them now, but there are absolutely still tensions between us and their species. I mean, that's the entire foundation of the Kilo 5 trilogy, and I really can't see an elite bending the knee to strict human rules, just like I couldn't see a human bending the knee to strict elite rules. And so, is it too crazy to wonder if the elites, who historically have actually faced the flood more than humans, have ever even once uttered their existence to unknowing humans? I'd say that there's a decent likelihood of that happening at least once. However, it's here where we reach a rather interesting twist in this story. So clearly Oni have come to the same realization that we did about, well, the frank practical impossibility of keeping knowledge of the flood contained, and they also know better than anybody that if you get out ahead of a leak rather than try and play catch up, it becomes much easier to control the fallout that that leak might cause. The perfect example of this, once again, being the case of Ben Giro. And so, in the years following the end of the war, the UNSC established Outpost Discovery, a glorified propaganda initiative that was meant to act as an educational tool and also a mobile recruitment station aimed at the next generation of UNSC personnel. Its main goal was to arm humanity with knowledge of their own history and galaxy, and part of this was an exhibition about various entities that we encountered during the war, one of which was what can only be described as a taxidermied infection form. Now, Outpost Discovery was open to the public. Literally anybody could go and see this thing in the flesh, which I think was the top brass's first attempt at exposing civilians to the existence of the flood, but in a manner that allowed them to control what and how much they saw, and also the context that they saw it in. Rather than their first exposure to the flood being some horrifying leaked shaky cam footage of the civilians of Voi being infected as their entire city is consumed with a thick, sickly fog, they instead see a disgusting yet entirely harmless infection form behind a thick glass box. Smart play from Oni, I gotta give it to him. The military have also been more exposed to flood knowledge in recent years as well, again, entirely under Oni's say-so. As a part of the War Games training simulations, Spartan 4s engage in flood containment simulations. Dedicated flood containment fire teams now exist as well, a volunteer force of Spartans who commit their combat prowess to specializing in flood containment measures, and of whom have actually been employed in the post-war years. You never hear of flood outbreaks because these guys are sent in specifically to contain them, and at least 99% of the time, they're successful. Hell, Gen 2 Mjolnir manufacturers even offer the Flood Visor for use by these teams that is specifically designed for assessment and containment missions into foreigner sites that may contain the parasite. So overall, it is clear that Oni are starting to lift the black tape on the flood a little bit nowadays, likely because their hand has been forced by what is frankly the utter impossibility of keeping the lid on the flood's existence forever. However, recent events may have significantly impacted Oni's knowledge and records of the flood. To prevent information leakage through systems and networks during the Created Uprising, Oni Spartan teams conducted extreme information sanitization operations on Earth, in which the Gen 1 recon helmet was specifically employed. And further, as of Halo Infinite, we now know that Cortana completely obliterated Oni Bravo 6, which is their Sydney-based headquarters on Earth, with a Guardian. And so, how many records, files, and how much data Oni had on the flood has now been destroyed by both of these efforts? we don't know for sure, but the combination of Oni's asset denial informational sanitization and also Cortana's literal physical sanitization of Bravo 6 suggests to me that neither party allowed much of that data to survive. How this is going to impact future Flood research, experimentation, and also leaks is up in the air, but if you ask me, I think the current state of the galaxy might bring us into a Wild West era of leaks and data trading when it comes to the Flood. And that, my friends, is everything that you would need to know about Oni's attempts to cover up the Flood, any and all possible avenues of Flood informational leaks, Oni's efforts to controllably declassify the Flood, and also how recent events in the universe have affected, well, all of the above. Okay, here's an interesting question. Leave your answer down in the comments. Say you were in the Halo universe right now, without the knowledge that you have today at least. Would you buy into a conspiracy theory about this mythological Flood zombie virus being a thing? Because it's very easy for us, with the perspective of having played the Halo games and obviously knowing that the Flood do exist, to be like, yeah, of course I believe that. But say you didn't have any of that foresight or any of that knowledge and you heard that conspiracy theory, would you believe it? I would hazard a guess that 99.9% of people probably wouldn't, but leave your thoughts and leave whether you would believe it or not down below in the comments. And so, with that said, I want to give a huge thank you to all of my amazing patrons for the continued support over there, as per usual. Thank you all so much, and thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll catch you all in the next one.